we wanted to use this section to discuss an interesting talking point that always comes up at international tournaments, and that is, of course, players who've swapped nationalities over the course of their career. This week on Transfermarkt, we pulled together the most valuable players, the top 100 most valuable players, actually, from our data set. And those players, are players who played for one nation at youth level and a second nation at senior level. And I'll throw this up on the screen for people who are watching on YouTube or Spotify. But for anyone listening at home or in the car, I'll quickly run through the top 10. Top, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about him, is Ayoub Boadi, the Morocco midfielder. He's market value of 50 million euros, who of course was French. Below him is Laporta, who went from France to Spain. And then there's Ange-Juan Bonny, who went from France to Ivory Coast. Brahim Diaz, Amin Gouiri, who went from France to Algeria. Declan Rice, who many may not know, technically went from Ireland to England. There's Kondogbia, who went from France to Central African Republic. Sebastian Haller, who went from France to Ivory Coast. And I think Diogo Costa rounds up the top 10, who went from Brazil to Spain. We've got the full top 20 on the list there. You can go to our website to see that as well. Manu, before we dig into the details, I just think the topic of nationalities is obviously one that football fans can get quite heated about, because if you're from one nation and then a young player decides to play for another one, it can be quite frustrating. But football, like real life, just shows that nationality is a very fluid thing, and it means different things to different people, doesn't it?
No, I mean, I can relate. I'm a dual national. It's not... Nationality can be fluid, far more fluid than you think, especially when you have both those passports and allegiances in your heart. He should pick that, or she should pick this and that. I think it's not always that straightforward, right? There's family that plays a role. There's opportunity that plays a really big role. I was very good at one sport at the youth level here in Canada, and if I had come to that because of the way where I was developed, I would have chosen the Canadian program over the German program, for example. And that there's a lot of things and factors that play a role, and I think. We do jump very quickly to conclusions saying a person should be doing that rather than that, without actually ever understanding the family dynamics and what's going on at home. And also, and I think this is a really big role that I think never really gets discussed, is the coachings. Like oftentimes your biggest mentors that make you decide one thing or another aren't necessarily in your family. They can also be coaches, right? I think that is always, if you haven't experienced it yourself, it's sometimes really hard to relate. But yeah, I can totally understand why a player might choose a different opportunity than another. And I think that is just fine. That is the freedom that we all have, right? Or people that have dual nationalities, that they have that freedom to decide. And it is not always straightforward.
No, it certainly isn't. And, even as this table itself shows, national teams can benefit as much as they can miss out. I mean, a good example on this list is actually Spain, who, lost, 3 players in the top 20 to other nations, but they also gained Diogo Costa from Brazil, So I think that's really interesting and something that's definitely worth noting. But I think what really stood out to me in this list, Manu, is how many players on this list stand out for actually winning success with their second nations, if you will. Laporta, who's second, obviously won the Euros with Spain. If I'm not mistaken, Sebastian Haller and Ndika won AFCON with the Ivory Coast not long ago. Brahim Diaz, the Real Madrid player, obviously born and raised in Spain, decided to represent Morocco, and not only finished top goal scorer at last year's AFCON, but also was part of the team that I guess technically went on to win it. I know it's still quite contentious in certain corners of the globe, but they are technical winners.
Say, be careful where you go with this.
The team that made it to the final and were awarded the trophy, I'll put it that way, to avoid any contention. But I think it always just goes to show, Manu, that people maybe think, oh well, you're either this or that, but in real life, like a lot of players maybe can grow up one country, they obviously have the heritage to play for another, and then they go on to be very successful because they obviously work very hard and feel very passionate about playing for those national teams.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the list would be even more extended, especially when it comes to Morocco, because I think a lot of their players grew up abroad, like someone like Hakimi, who, represented Morocco his entire life, was
Mm-hmm.
born and raised in Madrid, right?
Yeah.
So I think that the list can be extended even further. I mean, Morocco is a really interesting case. I saw them last weekend when they beat Canada, and they're an amazing team. I think they're top 6 country now in the world according to the FIFA rankings. And yeah, I think that and I don't always believe in the ranking, but in this case, I think that's actually quite accurate. They're a really good country. And they benefit a lot from dual nationals. Having said that, they also have the king poured a ton of money into infrastructure and player development into the sport, right? And so I think in that case, it makes sense why even top players, Bourdi could have easily represented France, Hakimi could have easily represented Spain, why they still chose Morocco, because there's a really clear like idea and plan behind how they as a football federation want to be successful, right? And I mean success not just on their continental level, like beyond that, right? They reached the semi-final at the 2022 World Cup. Um, I think if they wouldn't be playing France in this World Cup, they would probably be going really deep as well. Although you never know, right? Maybe they beat France. And I think they are on a path where when they host the tournament in 2030 alongside Spain, Portugal, that they could be one among the favorites to win it, right? And so if you're a young player now growing up in Morocco, growing up in France or Spain, and you're Moroccan descent, it isn't just a choice about, hey, I could play for Spain or France and win a World Cup. It's like I can also represent the country of my parents and still win the World Cup and, live up to my heritage. So that just shows you, and I think that's really impressive about this case, is where a country that really sat down and said, we want to be really good at this. I spoke to an executive who said Morocco play like a top European country. It's very much true, Stefan, they do. And I think that is a really fascinating case. Boadi is the best example because he's definitely one. I mean, France produced so many players, but he's definitely one where you say, wow, he could really help France.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned that because anyone who's looking at this graph or this table will probably note how many French flags are on it. Players who represented France at youth level make up 12 of the top 20. And I actually checked the top 100, 57 of them were
Whoa.
technically eligible to play for France at senior level, but went on to play for other national teams. There are obviously quite literally dozens and dozens of examples we could bring up. You mentioned Boadi's a perfect example. Laporte, as I said, went on to play for Spain. Sebastian Haller, Abdou Diallo, who obviously went on to represent Senegal. Even Ryan Ait-Nouri, the left back, for Man City. Some really big names, big Premier League stars, who opted to represent other countries at senior level. I think, Manu, this feels to me like the kind of hidden secret to why France are the national team that they are. Because the sheer scale of their youth development is so incredible, not only are they producing a great French national team, but they're also producing great players for like 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 more national teams as well.
Yeah, I mean, France, Paris in particular, right, is the hotbed of football in the world. It used to be Brazil, Rio and Sao Paulo used to be the two cities that produced the most talented players in the world, and they still do, I guess, to some extent. But because Paris is Paris also is such a multicultural place and such a gigantic place, and the talent development there is enormous. I think the difference not maybe, it is the difference between France and Brazil is that when Brazil was at the top of producing talent, very few players had a second nationality. Like they would go and represent other countries because they would play there for a few years and get a passport, right? But with France, it's just these kids are getting born with dual nationalities and then go and represent another country. And the most impressive part about this, and I've seen a lot of this World Cup, is that it doesn't hurt France one bit. They still have by far the best team in the world, and I think it's not even close at the moment, Stefan.
Yeah, well, it's a great thing, isn't it? Because it also means that players who would never get a chance to play for France can go on and play
Yeah.
for other national teams. So, yeah, and we've mentioned a few of them, of course. Boadi, as you said, he probably could play for France at some point, but he opted
Hmm.
for Morocco. There's obviously some players at this current tournament, some who've already have been at the tournament. We mentioned a few of the Ivory Coast guys, but Declan Rice, still playing for England, shot winning the
Hmm.
World Cup, and of course Boadi and Diaz from Morocco as well, if they can get past France.